Welcome back to Hungry for History. If you are only allowed to eat cold food for a few days, what food would you choose? In ancient China, there was a festival called the Cold Food Festival, in which people would stop cooking with fire and only eat cold food prepared ahead of time. In today's video, I will talk about the history of the festival and introduce you a typical cold dish people would prepare for the festival. Let's get it started! The earliest text reference to the Cold Food Festival was from the book Xin Lun, which means New Discussion in English, by an ancient Chinese philosopher in the 1st century CE. It says, quote, "The people in the commandery of Taiyuan would abstain from using fire to prepare their food for 5 days during the coldest days of winter. Even in cases of severe illness, they do not dare to violate this prescription. They do this in honor of Jie Zitui," unquote. Then who was Jie Zitui? So Jie Zitui was an aristocrat who served the prince of Jin state, Chong'er, during the spring and autumn period of Chinese history. Chong'er's father, the Duke Xian of Jin, had multiple concubines, which was a common practice for the nobility at the time. His favorite was Li Ji, who was a princess from a neighboring tribe called Rong. Li Ji gave birth to a son named Xi Qi. She wanted to make her son the successor of the duke by incriminating the duke's other sons. Chong'er was framed for revolting against the duke in 655 BC. As a result, Chong'er was forced to flee for his life and sought refuge in his mother's family. And Jie Zitui was one of a few trusted followers that went in exile with Chong'er. Chong'er was in exile for about 20 years. In 636 BC, with help from a rival state of Jin, Chong'er went back to his state and became the new Duke of Jin. According to Zuozhuan, an ancient Chinese narrative history covering a period from 622 to 468 BC. So, according to this book, in 635 BC, after Chong'er succeeded the throne, he gave rewards to those who had followed him in exile. But Jie Zitui refused to take any credit and did not receive any rewards as well. He believed it was the heaven's will that Chong'er made it back to the state of Jin and inherited the throne. He says, quote, "It was the heaven who placed him in his present position, and how false it is in those officials to think it was their strength which did it. He who steals the money of another man is pronounced a thief. One name shall be given to them who seek appropriate for themselves the work of heaven," unquote. And he found it impossible for him to associate with such person and decided to retire for his position and not care about political affairs anymore. The same story appeared in a number of later works, covering a period from 200 BC to 600 CE, but with some embellishments. Some versions say that Jie Zitui and his mother moved to a mountain of Jin and lived in poverty and obscurity. Later, Chong'er tried to invite Jie Zitui back to court, but Jie refused Chong'er's request and chose to remain in seclusion. Out of desperation, Chong'er ordered to burn down the mountain where Jin lived to smoke him out. It turned out that Jie and his mother were burned alive. Some say that when Chong'er was in exile, Jie Zitui even fed Chong'er with flesh cut off from his own thigh. Those stories portray a man whose behavior seems strange and a bit crazy. However, he was praised for his loyalty to Chong'er and his disinterest in material gain. According to Zuozhuan, Chong'er regretted and set aside lands to commemorate Jie Zitui, saying, quote, "I do this in memory of my error in neglecting Jie Zitui and to honor a good man," unquote. It is also said that Chong'er renamed the mountain after Jie Zitui's family name, Jie. He also established a town nearby the mountain called Jiexiu, which means Jie's rest place, and created the Cold Food Festival as a memorial period for Jie. No fire was allowed to be lit during this period, not even for the preparation of food. Local people believe that Jie Zitui became a guardian god for the mandatory of Taiyuan. They also built temples dedicated to him as well. Eating cold foods during the festival caused some health issues that lead to death and therefore incurred criticism from some of the local officials. in the biography of a man named Zhou Ju, who was the governor of Shanxi around 130 CE. People still fervently observe the custom after Jie Zitui passed for about 400 years. It says, quote, during the months of his death, his soul would be unhappy if anyone made a fire, and for that reason, both the ruling class and the common people ate cold food for a month every winter. No one dared light his stove, which meant that the old and the very young found this hard to bear, and many died every year, unquote. As the governor, Zhou Ju wanted to change the situation and tried to persuade people for not following the custom. He wrote a funeral oration and placed it in Jie's temple. In it, he said living without fire in the coldest day of winter harmed man's life and was not what sage Jie Zitui intended. He ordered to circulate the oration among the people, including those illiterate, so they would continue to use fire during the memorial days of Jie Zitui. Zhou Ju's measure might have been effective for a while, but later records show that the following governments had multiple failed attempts to stop people from observing the Cold Food Festival. Then why did people continue to observe the festival at the risk of their health and life? In 317 CE, a hail struck the area of the mountain Jie and caused innumerable deaths. For over 300 miles, trees were destroyed and crops in the field were wiped out. Back then, the area was part of the later Zhao, which was one of the 16 kingdoms in northern China. Shile was the emperor of the state. One of his officials suggested that the disaster happened because Shile prohibited the Cold Food Festival. He said, quote, Jie Zitui has been venerated throughout the ages. Some think it was not proper to discontinue his worship. When one man sighs, the royal way is diminished. How much more so when the spirits are dissatisfied, will the emperor on high be moved? Even if you cannot let the whole empire join in this festival, it is fitting to permit the common people to worship him in the region around mountain Jie, unquote. Again, a government's attempt to prohibit the observance failed again. By the 540s, the Cold Food Festival spread from Taiyuan to the rest of China. In Qiming Yao Shu, a book about agriculture and agronomy written by Jia Sixie in the 350s, I found a description of the Cold Food Festival. We talked about this book before. The episode on Niangao, the Chinese rice cake, is based on a recipe from this book. About the Cold Food Festival, Jia Sixie says, quote, today when you look at the trees on Mountain Jie from afar, they all look black, as if they had burned. And there is one tree that looks as if a man were holding it in his arms. Generation after generation have worshipped here, and there have been a certain number of miracles. The common people took pity on Jie Zitui's destiny, and on the anniversary of his death, put out their fires and ate li lao that was prepared ahead of time, calling this cold food. This occurred around the day before the solar period of Qingming. This practice has spread throughout China and become a well-established custom, unquote. Li lao was one of the cold food dishes prepared in advance and consumed during the festival. It was kind of congee made of barley and served with sugar. In Qiming Yao Shu, Jia Sixie also prized the li lao recipe. One puzzling part of the recipe was the character Xin. This is because the character Xin can refer to apricot kernels and almonds in modern Mandarin. I wasn't sure which ingredient this recipe calls for, so I did some research about almond cultivation in China. I found the answer in the book Food in China, A Culture and Historical Inquiry. In the book, American anthropologist Frederick Simmons points out that almond trees were first domesticated from the eastern Mediterranean to Central Asia, and during the Tang Dynasty, almond kernels were brought to China as tributes to the royal families. Since the almonds and apricot kernels are similar in appearance and taste, foreign travelers to China often refer to cakes made of apricot kernels as almond cakes. Since ancient China, a few varieties of apricot trees have been grown primarily for their kernels. The kernels were ground into flour and made into cakes, cookie, curds, and porridge. During the time when Qiming Yao Shu was written, which was around 530 CE, Almonds were not widely available to common people. These facts lead me to believe that the porridge is most likely made of apricot kernels and not almonds. If you are concerned about the safety of consuming apricot kernels due to the amygdalin they contain, which converts to cyanide in human body, and enough cyanide can cause poisoning and illness, you can substitute apricot kernels with almonds. Here is my translation of the recipe. Use wheat barley, make a pot of porridge. Take some apricot kernels, use hot water to skin the kernels, and finely grind them. Add water to the ground kernels and mix them together. Use a cloth to strain the mixture to get the liquid. The liquid tastes good when it's pure and thick. It tastes bland when too much water is added. Light up dried cattle manure and bring the apricot milk to a boil. Let it simmer until it's so thick that it looks like pig brain. Then add in the barley porridge. Cook the milk porridge on low heat and slowly stir it until it is well cooked. The recipe calls for dried cow manure as a fuel source, but I'm not going to use it because we don't want our house to smell like poop. So to make this recipe, you need 2 ounces of apricot kernels, 2 ounces of barley, and 5 cups of filtered water. Step 1. Soak the barley in water for about an hour. In a small pot, add 2 cups of water and the barley. Cook on high heat until the water starts boiling. Then turn to low heat and let the porridge simmer for about an hour. Pour the porridge into a container and set it aside and let it cool. Step 2. In the same pot, add some water and bring the water to a boil. Toss in apricot kernels, leave them in the boiling water for about a minute. Take out the kernels and then use your fingers to squeeze the apricot kernels to remove the skin from them. You may want to be careful here because I did have a few shoot away from me when I squeezed a little bit too much. Add the apricot kernels and 3 cups of water to a blender and blend until the water becomes creamy and smooth. You can use a nut milk bag or cheesecloth to strain the milk. Pour the milk through the cheesecloth into a mixing bowl and then squeeze to extract all the liquid. Step 4. Pour the milk back to the pot and cook on high heat until it becomes thicker. Step 5. Pour the barley porridge back into the milk and let it simmer for about 30 minutes until you have a thick consistency. Step 6. Pour the porridge out into a container and let it cool down before you leave it in the fridge overnight. When you eat the porridge, you can drizzle some honey on the top. It's time for me to try out the porridge now. So the first thing that stands out to me is the texture of the whole grains of barley. They are nice and chewy, and while the apricot milk provides more a background flavor, and it adds a very nice creamy texture to the porridge. And it's a really nice cold dish to eat in the summer here in Oregon. But I don't think I want to eat this during the coldest days during winter. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. I appreciate those encouraging comments my viewer left for each video, which really helps me to keep going and creating more content. Please leave a like, share, or subscribe to help my channel grow. I really appreciate the support. I hope you have a good week. I will see you soon. Bye bye.